Hi, everyone. In today's podcast, we're going to talk about evidence-based birth's most popular signature articles. Hey, everyone, and welcome to episode 32 of the Evidence-Based Birth podcast. If you've been following along with us, we've been immersed in a pain management series, but for the next 2 weeks, we're going to take a little break from that. But I didn't want to just pause the podcast. I wanted to give you something useful that you could listen to and learn from while I'm enjoying some time off. So I wanted to spend some time today talking about our most popular signature articles at Evidence-Based Birth. If you want to learn more about the history of the Evidence-Based Birth website, I'd love to encourage you to listen to episodes 1, 2, and 3. And we also did a little bit more behind the scenes in episode 24. And today I'm going to focus in on the process of our signature articles and through our most popular articles and some of the updates we found when we last looked at the research on those topics. So our signature articles are the foundation of evidence-based birth. These are the free peer-reviewed articles that are summaries of all of the research on a particular topic related to childbirth. We spend a tremendous amount of time on the research, preparation, writing, and presentation of each article, as well as developing courses and other learning materials. For example, when I first wrote the signature article on vitamin K, I estimate that I must have spent at least 100 hours on research and writing of that article. Once we write and publish an article, the process doesn't stop there. Every couple of years, we revisit the research, we do a literature review, and if something comes up in the interim, an important study comes out, such as the ARRIVE study coming out, which is highly applicable to our due dates article, we'll go and revise that article. So when we first publish an article, before we publish it, we send it to experts in the field. These experts are always acknowledged at the bottom of each article. Some people don't know the difference between what we call a signature article at Evidence-Based Birth and a regular blog article. Our blog articles are released more frequently and they cover more specific aspects of a given topic. So it's kind of a more narrow look at one small topic. With our blog articles, we publish them on the blog, on our podcast, and on YouTube to give up-to-date glimpses into these hot topics. Sometimes we use our research in those areas to springboard into more in-depth projects in the future. Signature articles, on the other hand, are a broad and deep look at all of the research evidence on a bigger topic. For example, we just released our new signature article all about fetal monitoring. Our fetal monitoring article was originally a blog article, but we took the extra steps to turn it into a full-fledged signature article. So how the process works with a signature article is first we choose a topic. This topic often comes from our audience, so we actually keep track of how many people email us or message us about topics they would like us to cover. Once we've chosen a topic, we ask our audience, what questions do you have about this topic? Usually via social media. And so we get a list of Q&As that people want to know about that specific topic. Another thing we do is called framing. And this is a topic I learned in my research studies as a doctoral student, where you learn how to identify your personal biases on a topic so that you can keep those in mind and try to put those biases aside while you're working on the research. We just did this recently. My research assistant and I, we had a phone conversation about a new topic we've chosen, which I'll tell you about next week. And we actually were like, okay, so what are your opinions about this topic? And we actually write them down and talk about them so that we can try and keep those in check while we're working on the research. Next, we begin our literature review. We decide on our key terms and what we're going to include and exclude from our research. And we start by looking for meta-analyses and systematic reviews. We also look for randomized trials, observational studies, quality improvement papers, and case reports as appropriate. Sometimes, if there are so many hundreds of studies on a certain topic, we mainly stick to the systematic reviews and meta-analyses, as well as perhaps some of the largest or most important randomized trials. Once we've determined what the relevant research is on a topic, we download all of the articles, we read them in their entirety, we add them to EndNote, which is our referencing software, and we begin to look at the research as a whole and kind of note some of the time frames. Okay, this is when this study came out, maybe the methods changed here, and we're paying attention to the time period when it was done, as well as the methods of each study and what they found, and the quality of the study. Once we have all of the references that we're going to need, we start drafting the article. One of the things we do when we're writing a signature article is we try to make sure that any factual statement that we make has a reference. We don't want to state facts without having anything to back it up. We also add links to all the references so that people can easily find the reference. And once we have a rough draft, we send it both to a medical editor to make sure it kind of makes sense and it flows and logically sounds good. And then we start sending it out to our reviewers. So our reviewers are looking for accuracy of content. Did we miss anything? Did we exclude anything? Did we get it wrong somewhere? And then we also ask them to check for bias. Are we giving an unbiased opinion? Our reviewers are a variety of healthcare professionals, research experts in the field, and then again, we also use a medical editor. The healthcare professionals, one of the things we also ask them for is this clinically relevant for you? What else might you need to know as a clinician? Or is there anything from your perspective as a clinician that's missing and that we need to include? We get our reviewers' suggestions, we make changes as appropriate, and sometimes we have to send it back to them for a final review if we made major changes. So that is the full process of how a signature article is born. You can read more about that at evidencebasedbirth.com and click on the About tab and scroll down, and it has our process listed there. Now, to actually find our signature articles, the easiest way to do that is just go to the main page, evidencebasedbirth.com. We also have a short link. You can always just type in ebbirth.com. And actually, when I'm telling people about my website, usually I'll just say, just start Googling evidence-based, and evidence-based birth is usually the second fill-in option on Google. So you get to the main page, click blog at the top, and you will see all of our articles there. You'll see that there's a bar across the top where you can pick what type of article do you want. So then you would click on signature articles, and what that will do is it will refresh the page and only show you our signature articles. Most of our signature articles not only have the full-length free text available online, but also a free one-page handout. Now, not all of them, I think maybe about 2 or 3 of them don't have a one-page handout yet, but most of them do have a one-page handout that you can download either by becoming a newsletter subscriber and using the link we've sent you, or there's a little button at the top of each page where you can join the newsletter and get the handouts. We also have short links for most of our articles. Most of them make common sense. So again, I like ebbirth because it's just shorter to type in on a phone. For example, ebbirth.com/due dates, all one word. That is one of our short links. And the short link is always listed on that one-page handout that you download. So when you're sharing the one-page handouts with your clients or with a colleague, at the very bottom, it always has that short link, so it's really easy to find. For example, ebbirth.com/waterbirth, ebbirth.com/group B strep. If you're in a pinch and you need to find one of our articles, you can always just Google it, because most of the time we end up at the top of the search results. So you could just Google evidence-based birth, group B strep, and that will take you straight to the group B strep article as well. So today I wanted to talk about 2 of our articles that were updated in the last year. So let me quickly tell you the signature article topics that we do have. We have articles currently on advanced maternal age, birthing positions, breech version, doulas, due dates, eating and drinking during labor, eye ointment for newborns, failure to progress, fetal monitoring, group B strep, induction or cesarean for a big baby, IV fluids, premature rupture of membranes, prolonged second stage of labor, skin-to-skin care after a cesarean, vitamin K shot in newborns, and water birth. Our top 3 most popular articles, our number 3 most popular article is group B strep. Our number 2 most popular article is due dates, and our number 1 most popular article is vitamin K. So let's talk about eye ointment for newborns, because for many years, this was actually the number 1 most visited article on our website. And if you Google eye ointment for newborns, often the evidence-based birth article is the first one to pop up. So to find this article, you just go to ebbirth.com/eye ointment, all one word, and you'll see the most recent version of our article that we updated in 2017. The main thing that we added to this article was we added information on whether or not erythromycin eye ointment can prevent eye infections caused by other bacteria such as staph. So typically eye ointment is given to prevent gonorrhea or chlamydia-associated eye infections after birth. These are sexually transmitted infections that the baby can pick up coming down the birth canal. However, this practice is common in the United States, but not as common in other developed countries around the world. In fact, in many states in the United States, it's still required by law that you have this eye ointment placed in your newborn baby's eye shortly after birth. However, a lot of parents are beginning to say things like, well, I don't need the eye ointment because I tested negative for gonorrhea or chlamydia, so there's no point in giving it to my baby. And often a response they will hear from hospital staff are, but this will prevent eye infections caused by other bacteria such as staph or strep. So in the revised article, we talk about this. Newborn pink eye infections are called ophthalmia neonatorum, often abbreviated ON. Other bacteria, so non-chlamydia, non-gonorrhea bacteria, cause about 30 to 50% of cases of newborn pink eye or ON. However, they do not cause blindness, and these bacteria are found in the eyes of newborns both with and without pink eye. It is true that erythromycin eye ointment may reduce numbers of bacteria when it's used in petri dishes, and it does reduce the overall level of bacteria in newborns' eyes. Now, the bacteria we're talking about here are things like Staph aureus and Strep and E. coli. These bacteria live on the skin and in the lungs, vagina, stomach, and intestines. They are picked up both during birth and from hospital or home exposures after the birth. Healthcare workers and other people who handle newborns can have these bacteria on their hands and bodies and not have any symptoms. Every time a new person has contact with the baby, the newborn's risk of exposure to these bacteria increases. Now, research has shown that erythromycin can prevent gonorrheal ON and possibly chlamydial ON or pink eye to some extent, although this is controversial still. But there is very little evidence that this is an effective way to prevent pink eye from other bacteria. We did find a few studies that have looked at whether eye ointment can reduce the number of bacteria in the newborn's eyes. One study measured the number of bacteria in newborn eyes after being treated with 3 different types of eye ointments: povidone iodine, erythromycin, or silver nitrate. All 3 types of prevention reduce the number of bacteria in the eyes of newborns, according to personal correspondence we did with the author. However, after the use of this prevention treatment, infectious pink eye still occurred in 13%, 15%, and 18% of newborns treated with these treatments. Povidone iodine was the most effective way of preventing pink eye from infectious causes. Silver nitrate and erythromycin were less effective. We also found another study published in 2014 where researchers in Iran randomly assigned 300 newborns to one of 3 groups. They could have 2 drops of colostrum, the mother's first breast milk, erythromycin, or nothing. After receiving this prevention treatment or the no treatment, the newborns are watched to see if they develop pink eye in the first month of life. Pink eye was most common in infants that did not receive any treatment. 33% of those developed pink eye in the first month of life. Followed by the group receiving colostrum, only 24% of them developed pink eye. And with those receiving erythromycin, only 16% of them developed pink eye. So there is some evidence that erythromycin may offer protection against pink eye from staph bacteria, since all of the babies in this study who had pink eye, it was related to staph. However, the research that we have right now on using erythromycin to prevent pink eye from staph and other bacteria is very limited. These were the only 2 studies that we were able to find. So at this point, we don't know if putting eye ointment in a baby's eyes is a truly effective strategy or not. Also, the strategy may be limited by antibiotic-resistant bacteria. That's because bacteria like staph and strep, which are thought to cause about half of all pink eye infections, are now becoming resistant to erythromycin. Erythromycin was an antibiotic first introduced in 1953, and by 1968, strains of strep had already developed resistant. In fact, half of all Group B strep strains are resistant to erythromycin. Resistant strains of staph bacteria have also been reported in newborns with pink eye who were given erythromycin. As a side note, I've had some people who are worried that perhaps the routine eye ointment use is causing the increase in drug resistance. But in corresponding with pediatric infectious disease specialists, we learned that the increase in antibiotic resistance is more likely related to the vast amount of people around the world who are taking erythromycin orally as a pill rather than the one-time dose that is typically given to newborns at birth. The other article I wanted to talk with you about is the Group B strep article, which you can find at ebbirth.com/Group B strep. This is also one of the top most popular signature articles at Evidence-Based Birth. And when we updated it in 2017, we spent a lot of time focusing on 2 areas of research that have a lot of new evidence, and that is the newborn's microbiome and antibiotics, as well as the rapid test for GBS during labor. So if you go to the signature article on Group B strep, you'll find a whole lot of information about who is more likely to carry Group B strep, how often do newborns become infected, are some newborns more likely to get sick from Group B strep, how accurate is the testing, and how effective are antibiotics, and how effective are other alternatives for treatment of GBS. Well, I first published this article in 2014, and when we updated it in 2017, like I said earlier, the two biggest areas of new research on this topic had to do with the microbiome and with rapid testing. When I first published this article in early 2014, I actually could not find any evidence on the effects of in-labor antibiotics for Group B strep on the newborn's microbiome. However, between 2014 and 2017, I was then able to find 8 studies in which researchers have looked at the microbiota consequences of IV antibiotics during labor for Group B strep. I created a table which you can find in the online article of these studies. In general, researchers enrolled infants whose mothers had IV antibiotics during labor, typically for Group B strep, and then compared them to infants whose mothers did not have IV antibiotics. Most of the researchers studied the infant microbiome by collecting and analyzing stool samples at different time points ranging from 3 days of life to 1 year of age. Overall, researchers have found that receiving IV antibiotics during labor does impact the infant's microbiome, at least temporarily. 7 of 8 studies found that IV antibiotics given to the mother during labor had at least a short-term effect on reducing beneficial bacteria and or increasing levels of non-beneficial bacteria. Of the 4 studies that actually followed infants over time, 2 of them found that the infant's microbiome had either recovered completely or mostly recovered by 4 to 8 weeks, while 2 other studies found important differences that persisted up to 3 months or even up to a year later in some infants. Perhaps the most important study on this topic, and the only one to follow infants for a year, was conducted by Azad et al. In 2016 in Canada. They studied 198 mother-infant pairs from a large Canadian study. They included infants if they had stool samples collected at 3 months and 1 year, and if there was complete information about antibiotic exposure during labor and during infancy. Infants were separated into 4 groups: no antibiotic exposure during labor with a vaginal birth, or antibiotic exposure with a vaginal birth, or antibiotic exposure with an elective cesarean, or antibiotic exposure with an unplanned cesarean. Cefazolin was the antibiotic that was typically used during cesareans, and penicillin was the antibiotic of choice for vaginal births. Researchers also measured the presence and duration of exclusive breastfeeding. The researchers found that the infant microbiome was significantly influenced by antibiotic exposure during labor, the route of birth, either cesarean or vaginal, and breastfeeding. At 3 months, the babies who had been exposed to antibiotics during labor or birth had a decreased level of beneficial bacteria, as well as a decrease in the richness of their microbiome, regardless of whether or not they were exclusively breastfed. The most severe deficiencies happened among infants born by cesarean. Infants born by cesarean also had much higher levels of Clostridium and Streptococcus, which are potentially harmful bacteria. However, by 1 year of age, most of these differences were gone, showing that the effect on the microbiome was short-term. However, some negative effects on the microbiome still persisted in infants born by unplanned cesarean who had not been breastfed for at least 3 months duration. In summary, it does seem that IV antibiotics during labor does have a short-term negative effect on the infant's microbiome, but this negative effect can be lessened by vaginal birth and by breastfeeding. We really don't have research right now to see if giving probiotics to mothers or newborns can help lessen or reverse the impact of IV antibiotics on the infant's microbiome. And we also still don't have any research if there's any long-term effects associated with the IV antibiotics and the temporary reduction in beneficial bacteria. I would expect in the next several years to see more research coming out in this area, particularly on the use of probiotics to help lessen the impact of IV antibiotics during birth. The other big area on Group B strep that's new that we added to the article, or not necessarily new, but there was a lot of new additions to the research, has to do with rapid testing for Group B strep. Rapid testing has been a hot topic for researchers over the past few years. There was a study carried out by Young in 2011 where they compared that 35-week regular culture test that most women get to the in-labor rapid test, and they also compared both of those, to the culture during labor. They found that testing women at 35 weeks with the culture only identifies 69% of pregnant people who actually have group B strep during labor. Meanwhile, the in-labor rapid test was much more sensitive. It identified 91% of those with group B strep during labor. Since that study came out, there's been at least 2 other studies published in 2017 that found that the rapid test identified 100% of people with group B strep during labor. However, in 2014, there was a real-life study where they looked at obstetricians and midwives doing the testing instead of researchers. They found that the sensitivity of the rapid test was only 86%, and on average, 24% of test swabs were invalid, meaning that 24% of the time, the clinicians were not able to get a result. More than half of these invalid results were due to improper handling of the test. They went ahead and trained the hospital staff in a 2-hour training, and that lowered the invalid rate down from an initial high of 55% down to 13%. So we still need more research on how using the rapid test in real life affects real patients. It seems to do well in very controlled research studies and not as well when actual clinicians are using the rapid test. I talk a little bit more about rapid testing in the Group B Strep article, but I think that is also an area where we're going to see more research coming out and potentially even changes in practice. But right now, the Centers for Disease Control has not updated their guidelines since 2010. So it'll be interesting to see the next time they update their guidelines what they say about the rapid test. So that's it for this week's podcast. Next week, I'm going to give you a sneak peek into what we are working on for the second half of 2018. So you're going to learn which new articles we're going to be releasing in the second half of the year, so you won't want to miss that podcast. Also, if you live near Canada, we just announced this week that I am coming to Caledon near Ontario to speak all day on November 17th. To find out more about that, just make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter at evidencebasedbirth.com, as we'll be sending out info about registration for that event. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great week. I'll talk to you next week. Bye.